Archaeodeath, walking in the footsteps of past funerals.
Hello, Professor. How are you?
I'm all right, Rabbi. How are you?
I'm well. I see you are ready, as am
I'm doctored
I.
up, a professor in a
So
doctor's
my,
guise.
I like it. I like it. Also, I have my
Oh,
police box coffee mug.
I have no other, apart from I have Irish whiskey to help sustain me. That doesn't really go with
Well,
the.
it's 11 a.m.
Cheers.
here, but I'm not going to say whether or not there's Irish whiskey in my. It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Absolutely, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I don't think such matters need to be revealed to the audience. These things are between you and your TARDIS. Anyway, it's probably it's probably liters. It's probably such a liters of it, but it's just how time space. It's smaller on the inside than bigger on the inside than on the outside. So
Exactly. Before we get started, first of all, I would just like to say thank you for joining us with me. For those of you who are just joining us, Howard and I have spent a great deal of time poring over the first four series of Doctor Who from Christopher Eccleston up through Journey's End before the specials of David Tennant going into Matt Smith.
yeah,
And what struck both of us, I know struck me, was the idea that there is some undercurrent of both archaeology and faith. And, when you get a rabbi and an archaeologist in the same room, what are you going to talk about? Both of those subjects. So we thought, hey, you know what? Maybe some other nerds might like to join us as we waffle on about the religion and archaeology of Doctor Who. Now, the way this will go is we are strictly sticking to the beginning of Christopher Eccleston to Journey's End with David Tennant. Hopefully, people like this enough that we will do it again and expand into the next series. I'm terrible with notes. I do have some, but I thought we would just kind of have a conversation about
yeah,
what struck out to
yeah,
both of us.
absolutely.
What do you think? And I
That's
have a
fine.
whole
That's
setup here,
fine.
so if I need to get up and get bouncy, I can move around my camera. And I might be action rabbi today. It'll be a whole thing. There might be some action
Oh,
rabbi happening
I have
today.
less space, but I shall try to emulate. If you start moving around, I shall also start, because the Doctor with his TARDIS, he's always jumping around, isn't he? There's always it's the most
He
ludicrously, if
is.
someone designed it for what do you know, one of those time space motion study things that they do for people who work in McDonald's and high fast food restaurants, where the number of paces and the number of gestures. The TARDIS is incompetent for any kind of, because he's got to rush around to change. Not anyway. That's not really what we're going to be discussing. But I thought,
That's
the
okay.
Doctor is all about
No, and I
movement, and it's all about
he's definitely frenetic. I'll give him that. And so, especially I think in the role of David Tennant, his energy level is just so high that it kind of comes out in his physicality. So Professor Williams, where would you like to start?
well. I suppose I could say something about why archaeologists are interested in TV shows at all. I suppose that is that something I need to explain, or is that
Yes, do
really
it.
obvious?
Oh no, do it, do it, do it.
Okay.
Oh, and
So
I
archaeology.
couldn't find
Okay.
my yeah.
You know.
Go ahead.
Okay. So archaeology is the study of societies, human societies, through their material traces, and that can be, as usually understood in popular society, popular culture today, to be the study of ancient times, of distant times, of prehistoric and early historic times. But actually, archaeology is the study of all human societies through their material culture, built environments, and landscapes. And in that regard, I'm very much interested in how our modern popular culture puts so much emphasis on the detailed construction of fictional virtual worlds, entire universes, and one of the most I've discussed this in relation to other TV shows that represent historical time periods, such as the TV show Vikings, but also how fictional futures are represented through fictional. And I've talked about, say, The Walking Dead in that regards in my blog, and other contexts about how The Walking Dead can be looked at as archaeology, because it's a fictional world that sits in an imagined, and I think we can be quite confident, since zombies don't exist, completely fantastical future, But it does allow us to reflect on a whole host of archaeological themes to do with systems collapse, state collapse, how people mourn the dead, deal with the dead through material culture, and so on. So there's lots of ways we can constructively engage with those fictional worlds as archaeologists, because these are firstly because they exist as environments in themselves of a fictional world of human communities interacting with animals, people, non-humans, undead, aliens, whatever it may be. But also because this is a medium by which we can have really rich conversations with new communities, people who have more knowledge of, say, the Star Trek universe or Star Wars than they have about ancient Egypt or the Roman Empire. And therefore, if we can actually use these as ways of discussing with not just young people, but any people of all ages, all linguistic and cultural backgrounds, it's another way archaeologists can engage and educate different audiences. So I suppose that's why. And Doctor Who really is one of the first ones I've been thinking about in this regard, because it's not simply one universe; it's multiple universes. It's transtemporal. It takes us into the distant past. It takes us into the future. It started off about as a kind of BBC education way of teaching history, in a sense. It starts off with many as a let's time travel to past times, and obviously the way we now understand it is so perhaps far removed from that. But even the most recent series still touch base with that standard: get in a box, jump out the other end. Oh, look, we're in the 4th century, 16th century. Oh, look, we just happen to have come across a famous historical personage, be it Queen Elizabeth I or an event that's just about to happen that everyone knows about, and we link in maybe some aliens or something like that. So, in many ways, I think it's a really rich, complex melting pot of lots of our modern ideas about time, memory, past, but also religion and faith, and how I think one of the things that I think is quite refreshing about Doctor Who is, unlike all the fact-checking, sort of knuckle-dragging comments you get every time there's a representation of the D-Day landings, or there's a representation of an 18th century Scottish hillside, or someone going, oh, that pigeon's wrong, or those fences wouldn't have been there till the 1820s, or those kind of accuracy obsessed people. Everyone knows Doctor Who's fiction, and it's a fantasy medium where we can explore concepts, ideas, narratives about the human condition, and our attitudes to our relationships with the supernatural, with deities, and it can be really constructive interfaith, intercultural space for conversations that aren't perhaps as loaded and perhaps get us away from those people who are obsessed with what kind of tanks were deployed by the Wehrmacht in late 1943, and whether it was a mistake to put one of those in the particular war film you're watching. That kind of that obsession with militario and detail that we find in so much discussions of historical representation. Unless people actually think Doctor Who's real and that there are Time Lords, in which case that's another discussion. But let's assume this is fiction, right?
Let me just say, I cannot confirm nor deny whether or not I believe that the world of Doctor Who exists somewhere. How about that? We'll just leave it at that.
Well,
for me, I came into Doctor Who late. I actually came into Doctor Who through Torchwood. I saw the early Doctor Who. I would watch it on PBS here in the United States when I was a kid. My first foray, of course, is Tom Baker. You never forget your first. And then when I got older, there was no Doctor Who. It had stopped, and Torchwood became a thing, and I was watching Torchwood, and I was told, oh, Doctor Who is back out again. And what my love of Doctor Who comes from the idea that there is so much religion embedded into the culture of the Doctor Who narrative. There is not an episode that goes by that I cannot see something that points to faith, not necessarily always religion, like structured religion, but faith, hope, humanity, all of the things that we build our religious beliefs on top of come from this idealistic world, even in the middle of it. And something you and I have talked about often in terms of the Doctor is that, for me, I see the Doctor as a lonely god that is exploring the world, and it is literally his companions that make him human, that help him to see the world through the eyes of humanity. And isn't that what we as people do? For those of us who have faith, isn't that what we do for God themselves, is to show the world to God through the eyes of humanity?
I think one of the strengths and weaknesses of the new series, if we can call it, I think is that the official word for this, is that they do indulge a lot of time exploring the identity of the Doctor and his or her or their, depending on, I don't know what, do we have an official recognition of pronouns now for the Doctor, now that we're fully embracing
Depends on the, I think it depends on the iteration of the Doctor, and I think that's also
right, okay, it's not now, well, that's an interesting point. Anyway, my point is there's been a lot of focus on the loneliness, the journey, the iterations which are deeply inhuman and genocidal about the Doctor, and yet also how he comes back again and again, returns to rework himself and to rework his morals and his identity. And I think that's a really brilliant thing about them. I also, as a long-term fan, find it a little tedious and a little self-indulgent at times. He says, knocking over his own stand here. But I like it.
I love the third person. I love the third person. I'm here for the third person narrative.
And I think that what I would like to say is that I came to the Doctor, I suppose the first Doctor I remember was seeing repeats of of the third Doctor and seeing the fourth Doctor, then following it through fifth, sixth. So fifth Doctor was more my thing, actually, Peter Davison, and then Colin Baker was a bit of a no, hang on, I'm getting my numbers wrong, but Colin Baker was a bit of a disappointment, and then of course Sylvester McCoy, and then it all died, and it died in a cruel way as a such show, because it was actually doing better. I thought it had some trashy storylines, and it was actually on the rise when I felt, and then it was cut off for 20x years or whatever. So yeah, I must admit though, I'm not a Doctor Who obsessive. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of Doctor Who. But I'm returning to it now after all these years, because I think it is really, it's really an exciting way of exploring archaeological themes. And yeah, I there's so every episode throws up more, one or more issue or observation that, trying to encapsulate that in the one conversation is going to be really difficult. But what kind of things do you want to talk about? So the identity of the Doctor himself is a bit of a god himself, but he also finds himself out of his depth in dealing with other kinds of quasi-supernatural force, doesn't he? And I think that's really interesting. Sometimes he seems very powerless. What's the episode what's the episode with the Crystal Planet where he's on the top holiday tour, and he basically has no midnight, yes, and he has absolutely no power to deal with this beast, this being.
See it. Oh.
And it relies on one brave stewardess who saves the Doctor and all the rest from whatever doom awaited them. Because and I love episodes that do that, remind you that everyone is fragile, everyone needs a savior or needs some kind of, and the smallest and bravest person, very Tolkien-like maybe, can make a difference in the sense of save, and that's where the companions fit in, don't they? Is they constantly not only remind the Doctor, but they act to save the Doctor. If Donna hadn't saved the Doctor, then all those events that unfold in Turn Left.
Yes, exactly.
And the Doctor dies beneath the Thames, and in that fictional, that alternative universe. So yeah, the Doctor's not a secure, fixed point of comfort for anyone, because he himself can easily be snuffed out. So I like that thing. Yes, it is a godlike state, but he also is very fragile, emotionally, intellectually, he's got his own ego problems, and he is one body, and he will regenerate, or perhaps he can. There are ways of killing Time Lords which stop them regenerating. We come across that again and again.
Later. For me, out of the two series or the two doctors that we are currently talking about, which is Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant, I think Christopher Eccleston better represented this idea of what is the word? Ooh, he was so, and it's gone. Yeah, this is what happens. He was so. Oh my God, he aggrandized a lot, and he really believed that he was untouchable. He thought of himself as like
cocky,
this untouchable. There it is. Thank you. Yes, he was completely cocky. But
I would have helped out earlier if I'd known where you were going. Yeah.
Well, and that when we get into the End of the Earth, which is the second episode in Christopher Eccleston's run. So we have a meeting, Rose, and you can't trust mannequins, which is going to be kind of a running theme between Howard and I, because we make these lists every time we come up. You can't trust. So if you hear that a lot, that's a running theme. But he meets Rose. You can't trust mannequins. He goes to the end of the earth, And what amuses me about this, and what is such a theme for me, is that there is faith at play. So they meet each other, and to give gifts in almost this kind of ritualistic manner, the same way we see in Christmas, the same way we see in Hanukkah, the same way we see in you're going to someone's home, you bring them a bottle of wine. And what does Christopher Eccleston do? He has nothing. So he thinks only to give of himself. I give you the breath from my lungs. And he just breathes on, but he
Forrester Cheam likes it though, doesn't she?
Yes, because he does it on a tree, who, of course, the idea of being breathed on, is intimate. So he's almost crossing this line between, he's creating this intimate connection between almost strangers, which is, I think, sometimes what community inside of religion tends to do, is create this manufactured almost intimacy between people you don't know, to try and gather them together and bring them under a common kind of banner. So also I'd like to point out, we will be taking some questions at the end of this, so if we're ignoring the comments currently, it is not out of a sense of no, we don't like you.
We'll come back to the comments, but we want to get our points across, and then so please stay with us. We will address things. I mean, for me, I was going to say, from an academic point of view, I have various edited collections on the Doctor Who reflecting on representations of history, but and mythology, and the incorporation of mythology. But it's very much about tracing receptions and stories in a very literary criticism approach. Here we have, how does the 16th century get represented? How does the 18th century? How does Victorian London get represented? And for me, that's one of the least interesting themes that links archaeology and history to Doctor Who. I mean, Brian Boyd, Professor Brian Boyd, who I think is still at Columbia in New York, he wrote a really fascinating 2002 essay called The Mythmakers, Archaeology in Doctor Who, in Miles Russell's book, Digging Holes in Popular Culture. Here it is. Digging Holes in Popular Culture. Archaeology and Science Fiction, with a foreword by a little known character called Douglas Adams. A preface by Douglas Adams.
Little known. No one knows him.
This is 20 years old, and it's the only edited book. I don't think it's even in print now. It's the only edited book on archaeology and science fiction more generally. And there's an essay on Star Trek. There's essays on various other fiction, but it's 20 years old. And the chapter, Brian Boyd's chapter is really short, and he makes the point very early on. It's a very short essay, so it's inadequate because it's completely out of date now, because he doesn't deal with any of the new series. But it's really insightful, because he starts off by making the point that it's the only article on archaeology in Doctor Who I know about, and he starts off by saying that the archaeology and science fiction both have similar origins, and they're both from the colonial world of Western Europe, encountering the other, encountering the non-Western, the alien, the unfamiliar. And in that regard, the doctor is very much like an archaeologist, a gentleman, educated, scientific male detective in his principal formulations. Of course, this has been subverted in a constructive way, but male, not necessarily aristocratic, but gentleman as in educated, university, very much like a 19th century Victorian or Edwardian, early 20th century detective adventurer. And I agree with that characterization, but I would add the spiritualist elements. He is a meddler and a renegade in different ways, I feel. And I feel what's really interesting is that in that short essay, Boyd does highlight that part of the archaeology of Doctor Who is the representation of the Doctor himself, and but also how other archaeologists, he identifies how other archaeologists and archaeologists are represented in the show, perpetuating very fixed literary stereotypes of how archaeologists are portrayed. He then also deals with the theme of monsters and mechanoids as a key theme of Doctor Who, and then also the theme of domination and resistance to totalitarian power, of which the Doctor is in himself, and I think this is important to say, a form of colonial actor, a form of dominating actor. He's a Time Lord who vowed not to interfere, but of course the whole point of the Doctor as a renegade is he's always meddling. It's like the Key and Peele sketch about one must indulge the local customs. It's like almost like you are there as a colonial actor in other people's culture, and
which is interesting because that is a Jewish
messing up.
That's a Jewish value. So I find that interesting that in Judaism, when you are in another person's realm, when you're in another person's country, we're supposed to abide by their customs. So maybe the Doctor has a little bit of Judaism in him.
Well, the Doctor seems to be, the Doctor is by definition constantly self-contradicting, isn't he? Because he's saying, I won't interfere, there's fixed points in the timeline, blah, blah, we hear all the fixed points in the timeline, yeah, but I'm doing it anyway. And you see that in the new series, constantly going, yeah, well, sod that, I'm making the change. I mean, the worst one, of course, is 1982 Earthshock, where he lets the Cyberman's time bomb basically hit Earth because he can't shift its trajectory, but he shifts it back in time. And he basically causes the destruction of the dinosaurs and therefore, inevitably, everything subsequent, and including the evolution of the human species, is created by the Cybermen and their attempt to destroy Earth civilization. In the, when was it set? In the 22nd century? I can't remember when it was. Anyway, they're in the mines, aren't they, and fighting Cybermen and their androids.
Yes.
And the androids are much more efficient than Cybermen at killing humans, but somehow we don't seem to see much more of them. But my point is, you have that story set in Earth's future about the Cybermen trying to destroy it, but he shifts it back in time. So my point is, the Doctor is, always meddling, literally creating the whole of human history, almost godlike, and yet simultaneously, so he's a very colonialist figure. He fights for injustice. He fights for the side of good, but he's very much like the kind of a good-natured version of a British liberal imperialist trying to civilize the world in the 18th or 19th century and making some things for the good, but screwing up a lot in the process. That's my sense.
I would say that I don't actually think he's always fighting on the right of the good. I think sometimes he is selfish in nature in terms of who he picks and chooses who is going to be saved. Like I know we're a little out of order, but when we go into my favorite arc, which is of course Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead, he cannot give up the idea that River Song is gone. He doesn't know her. He's never met her. We know that she's met him. She says one word to him and suddenly he realizes that he can trust her with everything that he is, but he cannot just give up on the idea. So up till then, we have all these times where he says, no, it's a fixed point in time. We can't do this. I can't do that. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be, until it's not meant to be. And he gets to arbitrarily choose what rules determine what's meant to be. Now, and same with, let's say like the Weeping Angels. He's stuck, but is he really stuck? When we see Don't Blink, and I know we're talking a great deal right now about David Tennant, but because the way that David Tennant plays the Doctor to me is one of childlike. He has all this power. He doesn't always know what to do with it. He doesn't know who he is. He's still trying to rediscover himself. And in doing that, he makes a lot of choices that are not necessarily, in my opinion, for the better good or the betterment of humanity or Earth or any other universe for that matter, as much as it's for the betterment of him. Up to and including leaving Rose in a parallel universe so he doesn't have to deal with the fact that he loves the woman.
And he never properly says it. And he leaves it. And he co-opts his own Dr. Donna to say the words for him. Because, you know, at the very... So that was... Yeah. But, I mean, also, though, I mean, from a theoretical point of view, one of the things I love about the Doctor is to use anthropological language, he's got a distributed agency. He is part cyborg himself in the sense that his relationship with the TARDIS is really complex. It's romantic. It's unpredictable. He's tied to it, as Davros says in the end of the second series. You know, watch the destruction of something that is so part of you. You know, with absolute glee more than anything else. The destruction of the TARDIS, which doesn't happen, of course, but, you know, is something that Davros just wants to see more than the death of the Doctor. You know, is the destruction of the thing that matters so much to him, and also he's tied to his sonic screwdriver. I mean, that's an extension of himself. His costume is a manifestation of his personality, but the screwdriver is absolutely integral. And of course, with the arc that you're talking about, where he encounters his future screwdriver, and there's future episodes where, you know, in the there's many other episodes where the screwdriver is actually multi-temporal. It's existing in multiple dimensions, and therefore calculations done on it are still running in millions of years' time, and it gets augmented, adapted, and of course the whole point of why would I trust you with my sonic screwdriver when he's to River Song? You know, why would that is one of the factors that leads him to realise how significant this person is to him, is the fact, why would I have allowed you to have that object? And that's very material. That's the material element that, as an archaeologist, I find very interesting, is that the Doctor's identity is these are not props for a performer. We know it's the Doctor because he's got a silly scarf. We know it's the Doctor because he's got a funny hat and he's got a broccoli or you know, attached to his lapel. Or it's not that. It's not just the English gentleman, eccentric traveller, adventurer, detective, of which archaeology is one element. It's the fact that he's utterly incomprehensible without his screwdriver and without his TARDIS, without his mode of transportation and his device that seems to have limitless uses to piss up and mess around with any alien tech, and sometimes gets it wrong, sometimes doesn't work, sometimes runs out of energy for reasons that we don't really understand. You know, it's almost anything can be done through the sonic screwdriver, or not. But you know, my point is, his identity is tied to those objects that, like him, go through different incarnations. You know, so every time he regenerates, this is such a blatantly obvious point to fans, I'm sorry, but, you know, every time he regenerates, the TARDIS and his sonic screwdriver also go through some kind of repackaging. And this isn't just about updating the show for audiences. This is about the individual identity, to use anthropological terms. The fact is, he's not an individual, he is a individual. He's not an individual in the sense of linked to his past lives, but he's an individual in the sense that he's linked to the TARDIS and the screwdriver. Do you think that's a fair approach, or do you think that's a bit weird? I don't know.
I don't think that it's weird. What I think is he is attached to these items because these items are what keeps him grounded. You know, what is the Doctor without his TARDIS? He's John Smith. What is the Doctor without his sonic screwdriver? Is he still the Doctor? And I think that those approaches, I think that in these approaches that we see, the TARDIS is more his companion than sometimes any of his human companions are. He's always going to be a madman with a box. That is how he is kind of visualized in the culture of Doctor Who, is he's just this lonely madman with a box, you know, that he goes through. So I think, and it was arrogancy. That's what I was thinking of for Christopher Eccleston. He has this arrogancy of the way that he interacts with people. And even the first episode, the Christmas special of David Tennant, he is arrogant. He says what does he say? I can bring you down, Harriet Jones, with just 6 words. 6 words. No, don't you think she looks tired? And suddenly the whole of Britain is collapsing because Harriet is like, no, I don't know why anybody's saying this. And to me, that was kind of him still having a bleed off of Christopher Eccleston's version of this kind of arrogancy. The same way he was with the end of the run for Christopher Eccleston. We have Bad Wolf plastered across the universe, and there is so much Christian themes that run through. When you and I started watching it together, and we were like, you can't trust Santa. What made the writers of this new series decide that angels were something to be afraid of? In both the weeping angels and mechanical angels that we find in the Titanic, or the idea of Santa suddenly now being something you have to run away from. All of these are things that have religious iconography or symbiology, or however you'd like to put it, that are supposed to bring us peace. And yet, how many of us, since Don't Blink, don't want to go anywhere near a statue of an angel that is doing this bit? I mean, I can't go anywhere near a Catholic church anymore. I just can't do it.
Well, I mean, actually, there's a broader thing of the uncanny valley of anthropomorphic statuary, mannequins, scarecrows, people in disguise, in masked individuals. Throughout the show,
little girls with red
mechanoids.
Balloons.
Sorry?
Little girls with red balloons.
Little girls with red. The scariest of all, actually. But but you have the whole range of people that seem human, but that even if they're possession where they are human, but they are taken over by some other force, they're dead, but they're coming back and trying to strangle Charles Dickens. All these different layers, there's different sort of types of undead, uncanny humanoid representation. Angels are part of that. Another level, though, as you say, it's not just that. The religious and quasi-religious imagery is particularly powerful, and I think the Weeping Angels is obviously a funerary motif. It's a rare but widespread funerary motif. So it links to the dead and the angel. Perhaps people don't even know this. I don't know if people know this, but the idea of a weeping angel is that there is a mourning, and particularly used for children's graves. In the Victorian and Edwardian age, that there is you also have children mourning children, or motifs of stylized other figures mourning, and there's a deeper, it goes earlier into church monuments of the 16th, 17th century, in particular, with neoclassical revival in the 18th century. But in a simple churchyard context, which we encounter it in multiple occasions. Although the very first time we come across the Weeping Angels is not in that context at all. But, we know it's coming from a churchyard. We know it's coming from that mourning context. And the angel is supposed to be dedicated on the ground, on the fixed body that is waiting for salvation, that is being, the mourning. It's it's not just a Catholic, but it's also a sort of high church, Anglican, middle class, sentimental, spiritual Christian thing, right? And to see that transformed is terrifying. And at one level, it's a disguise. It's another thing, but it's not in disguise, because it's actually got the power of a supernatural being to and it is stone. It turns to stone because it can't be seen for reasons that are never made clear. But you have it works because it kind of doesn't make any sense as well. And that, I think, is just one of the most terrifying. Yes, the Weeping Angels, but it's one of a host of sort of masked mechanoid mannequins, right the way down to the Toclafane, who are the butchered last remains of humanity struggling to survive at the ends of the universe, and are turned into little more. There's another version of the Cassandra, the last human, isn't it? Stretched and manipulated to a point beyond where humanity ends. So I think the show plays so often with the boundaries of humanity and the terror of something that maybe was human, could be human but isn't. That's my
I
thoughts on
think
that.
I think with the Weeping Angels, especially for me, the idea of the statuary that we pass by so often, and even in that particular episode itself, it talks. You see images of not just angels but gargoyles and other types of marble statuary that they show at the end of the episode to say you never know who's kind of like or what is happening. So for me, the way that I view the weeping angels, especially the way it's explained, that they kill you, but they kill you by taking away your life and then making you almost relive a life in a way that you would never known it before. You know, we have the girl thrown back 50 years into a time that uh, she has no compass for, she has no identity for, she has no idea what she's doing. She goes from a life where there's DVDs and washing machines back to a time where now she's trying to figure out how she's going to milk cows with this farmer she runs into, trying to figure out her entire life over again. And to me, I feel like that is almost a way of showing that how when we are caught up in something that can happen to us. For me, the Weeping Angels is also an allegory for faith, that somehow faith is transformative in this way that puts us onto a path that we maybe do not understand, we do not know, we've never been, and it's something new that we are about to explore, emptied out of what we previously knew.
I mean, I suppose the show makes a lot of play on one of the ultimate punishments you could experience is eternity, whether you are, and
Yes.
the doctor, punishes the family of blood. I can't remember the details of, one of the ways he does it is by not killing them. He shows his utter power over them by fixing them in mirrors, fixing them in vortexes and on the edges of black holes and things so they can never die. But a much more other kind of horror is the horror of living a life, not dying, not null, not punishment, not hell, but a life
loneliness,
that's uncertain, of isolation. I'm now 100 years earlier, and all the lives, people I knew are no longer there, being socially isolated. So I think there's a whole series, again, another nest of how time can be the ultimate punishment as well as the ultimate gift. I think that, I don't know.
And no, I agree with you. I think though that what I see is that he is showing, or at least the show is attempting to show, that isolation and loneliness is probably more of a punishment than anything you can think of. And that brings me to something. Yeah, and that brings something to me as somebody who studied sociology. We are a tribal people. Humans want to find our tribe. We are desperate to find our others, our connections, the puzzle that fits and kind of collectively clicks into place. And when you have, like, the family of blood, where this family has been together forever. Now, not only have they been separated from their family, no matter how evil they are now in isolation. They are no longer with their tribe, and they are destined for an eternity of loneliness. The little girl he puts into the mirror, I think, is the worst punishment out of the four of them, because she gets glimpses. The others are put into like holes and made into a scarecrow, but she gets glimpses of what life could be like through the mirrors of people maybe getting ready for dates or getting ready to go out for family occasions. But here she just gets these slight glimpses of what she had and she will never have again. And to me, that is the ultimate punishment for humanity, is to live a life in isolation, never being able to click in with the people who make you feel that life is worth living in the first place. No matter how evil the family of blood was, together they had meaning, they had purpose, they had goals. Separated, what are they? And maybe I sound weird.
It's really interesting because it does make me think about the way in which is the Doctor himself not only terrifying in his potential power, and but he is terrified of his own capabilities to perform, to enact those powers, and mm, I, I was going to say, so we've dealt with mechanoids and cyborgs a bit and showed how many different ways cyborgs. The other thing I was going to say, I wanted to circle back if I may, because one thing I had hoped to say about the Doctor's individuality was not only the TARDIS and the sonic screwdriver, but a really interesting thing in season 3 of the new series that I wanted to ask you about was the use of the pocket watch, because both the I can't remember what they call it, but it's a device that basically takes the Doctor out of time, allows him to escape. The stopwatch, yeah.
Yeah, his fob watch.
Fob watch, sorry. And of course, then we encounter Professor Yada having the same thing and not realizing who he is. Now, both of those items are therefore another kind of, they're almost suppressing devices on the Time Lord, the Time Lord's identity, but they're also therefore containing the identity. And I thought that was a really an interesting use of another piece of material culture, is a key connection. And there's various other objects throughout the Doctor Who, the old Doctor Who's, the key to time, but also the other objects that serve these kind of quasi-magical functions that the Doctor has to. So objects, like a lot of fantasy, they revolve around special objects, ancient objects, heirlooms that are keys to destruction or keys to salvation in different regards. And in this case, I thought it was really different because it's actually a key to the Doctor's own existence, in a sense, that he's hiding within it. I just thought there was lots of really clever ways in which material cultures, antique, little sort of, it's just an object, I haven't even noticed it, because the idea doesn't even notice the watch is there. I think that's really interesting dynamic of the show in terms of.
And that brings me to a question for you as an archaeologist. Now, as an archaeologist, you that is your area of expertise. But do you think that, not for you specifically, but for archaeology in general, do you think that sometimes looking back into material culture of the past keeps this particular this particular area of academics from being able to see into the future? Or do you believe that the use of looking into our past is what helps us predict in some ways the way our present and future dynamics will go?
I don't know if it gives me any better sense of what's coming. I think it, but it does. I mean, I think I will skirt that question. I should dance around that, answering that by saying that the TV show Doctor Who is all about future past. I mean, many of the futures represented, while seemingly and seductively about progress, that human and diaspora, that the idea is that the human race populates the universe, and that there's no, and that they survive in so many digital augmented forms, and we are somehow the great special success story of the galaxy. Never properly explained, and it's at one level you think, oh, he's looking at the tech when he goes into future worlds, and he's going, look, yeah, they got to the 28th century, 58th century, we know, because they're using this kind of booster on their space, but in many ways those futures are all reflections on our past. Different space races, different industrial revolutions, but also ideas of collapse and arrested development. And we have a creature that's deliberately manipulating social media in the first series. Is it episode 7, where there's a space station above Earth that's conveying all of the the TV programs but the world is somehow backward, which is very much like living in the UK in 2022. You feel very much like we're not at the place we should be, but but it does feel, the Doctor goes, hang on, we're way behind. Things should have developed further than this, as if he's got the long game, episode 7, that's it, and then they return there, don't they, at the end in Bad Wolf in episode 12 of the first series. And so I think at one level we get a vision of our future as one of development, but one in which things can go wrong, things can go backwards, can break down, And so there's a lot of future pasts in Doctor Who that reflect on our reliance on technology, our anxieties over technology, how technology can destroy us, be it all us, we're all connected into a virtual Wi-Fi that can be manipulated. We've all got cars that can spew out poison into us when the Sontarans decide to take over. There's lots of ways.
The TV that comes through to basically suck our faces off.
Yes, in the 1952 Elizabeth II coronation episode, you have lots of ways that technology can damage and destroy us. So there is actually a lot of almost nostalgia and Luddite or suspicion of human development in Doctor Who, and in a healthy way, I think. And I think there is a lot of archaeology in Doctor Who in terms of showing us the past, but showing us futures very much modelled on past. So many of the outer space civilizations can be divided into 4 forms. I'm going to put this as a theory, right? And you can tell me whether the listeners can think whether this is right or wrong. I think that you either got space savages, and I use the word deliberately, representations with a colonial gaze of space versions of the primitive, right? And that's a term I'm using deliberately because I think that's the way I think we're being shown it. And we've got space barbarians. I'm very much thinking of a 19th century evolutionary model of societies moving from savagery to barbarity to finally reaching civilization. And again, it's not something I espouse, I'm just saying that's what we're being shown. So we're seeing very much a 19th century literary construction of savagery, barbarity, civilizations, and then the next levels beyond the civilizations is empires and confederacies. And the 4th level, so we have the Shadow Proclamation, Galaxy, Universe Police, confederacies of the good, who the Doctor, goes, you will lead, they go to, you will lead us into battle against the Daleks. And he goes, no, thanks. And he just, tries to sort it out on his own, because firstly, his ego, secondly, he doesn't want another massive war across the universe. But, you have the confederacies, but you also have the empires, the Cybermen, the Daleks, the dominating imperial, and of course, humans are clearly one of these empires. And we keep seeing foreshadowings of this, even on a Earth scale, when Torchwood are talking they're talking about they're going back to imperial measurements because that's what the new British Empire will be. So there's Earth-based imperial, but then the idea, I think, hidden behind it all is a bit of a critique of British imperialism, that there are future British empires or American empires or versions of an Anglo-American empire that are going to go out into the galaxy and into the wider universe. And that type of thing, I think, is really where we get reflections on our history in the future and outer space in Doctor Who. And so that's completely answering a different question to the one you asked. Does it make me any better understanding our future? No, but I think TV shows like this are really carefully and critically reflecting on our concerns, our anxieties over where we've come from and where we're going. And issues of slavery and indigeneity, of colonization, are there in a whole host of different forms. Perhaps sometimes overt, sometimes subtle.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when, going back to the old Genesis of the Daleks, you're going back to First World War trenches on Skyro, and that idea has come back to with the Capaldi Doctor when he goes back and finds Davros. This idea of a world in constant war. There's lots of ways our past is reflected in outer space context.
No Capaldi. No Capaldi later. No Capaldi. No Capaldi. Capaldi later.
Apologies.
Yes, for me, some of the things that stick out for me in relation to being somebody who is a theologian is the way that the Doctor not only acts as the arbitrator of who will be punished, who will not be punished, in terms of like the family of blood, like with the Cybermen, with the Daleks. Anytime he faces a large foe, a big foe. I don't know why I have no words this morning. Maybe it's what I put in my coffee. But whenever he is at what you think is going to be certainly the end of the Doctor, the end of humanity, he somehow still manages to bring hope. So for me, as someone who is a theologian, that is something that in my particular career is what we are trying to do, is to say that even in the darkest moments, there is still a light that can be seen if one just cares to look. And I think that is something that he brings along, sometimes not well, sometimes he flusters it. I mean, let's be honest, he chose Rose, the bad wolf, over everybody on that station. He definitely has the iconic villain in that particular episode, where he portrays, I will sacrifice the entire world to save one person. Whereas, we know the hero trope is, I will sacrifice one person to save the world. And in that moment, you wonder, where does his actual loyalty lie? Is it to the saving of humanity, or is it to the fact that I'm going to save this one human and blast be the others? Now, in contrast to that, we then have this human who says, no, being there to help you do all of these things is more important than my own existence and that of anything else. I'm going to go out of my way. I mean, she literally fights with Jackie and with Mickey, who is literally the epitome of the modern series is Tin Dog. Let's be honest. K9 is better than Mickey, but that's just me. And puts herself in mortal peril to absorb the vortex, the time vortex, to look into space and time itself. And why does she say it? She says, because I want you safe, my doctor. And I think that is what the balance is he sees himself as this person who is allowed to make these kinds of choices, and forgets that his companions are not just props to give him a sense of humanity, but they're actually attached. They're entwined with him in ways that he thinks he's doing. To me, it's almost like somebody who says, I'm doing this for the betterment of you, without actually taking into account that that person involved has the right to decide what is the betterment of themselves. She, pardon my Hebrew here, fucks up all of time and space, throwing Bad Wolf across the universe. Yeah. To bring her to the moment where she gets to save the doctor. But then it turns it on its ear, because in saving the doctor, it puts him, he dies. He goes through his regen, and we are met with then David Tennant. It's almost like this analogy for like change and understanding and taking on the idea that someone else could actually be equal to you is almost an act that undoes, that unhinges somebody and creates them a brand new, like reinvents them. I probably I
don't want to jump ahead to future. I don't want to jump ahead to future episodes, but already I see people in the chat are reflections on the same theme that come up with the Matt Smith Doctor and so on. But I think I am trying to wonder whether we do ever encounter a Doctor who escapes the mess of his own making. And as a character, and maybe just a quick allusion to the future, maybe Tom Baker too is finally when the Doctor becomes safe, and the way he becomes safe is by becoming an art curator, becoming a kind of archaeologist, by becoming a person who's a custodian on a painting. I don't know. I know that's jumping ahead, but I'm
gonna allow it. I'm gonna allow it, because that moment for me is exactly that. It's like he becomes this entity that understands what his actual role in the world is to be a caretaker, not necessarily that's the arbiter and judge.
We so deride caretakers, we so deride curators, and there is a theme, and there is a heritage preservation theme running through Doctor Who, of preservation of the timeline, of history itself, of the coherence of the universe, and protecting cultures under threat, of being a curator. And while you could easily critique that as a Western colonial function itself, that there is a preserved, pickled sense of history that must be defended and you can rip that to pieces if you like, but there is a generous characterization here with the Doctor that maybe if you stop running around saving people but try to actually be a quiet, calm curator, maybe it's in that manifestation to shift our worlds from less of an Indiana Jones and more of a Marcus Brody kind of character, and more of a quiet curator.
Marcus Brody got lost in his own museum, though.
This is true. But there is that sense that maybe that is the piece the Doctor finally gets at some point in some unspecified future regeneration. I don't know. I just came to mind when you were saying that, is that there is something almost like, and if from a more religious version, is that almost like rather than some crazed missionary out there trying to impart God's word in a Christian way to a forgotten tribe. Again, I'm using terms that are obviously I know are problematic, just in case people don't understand what I'm doing here. They find actually a better role being a small parish priest in a small French village type analogy. There is a much more secure, more fixed role, and I'm not saying it's only a Christian view. I'm saying just I don't know. I think there's different Doctors and different religious and parallels to those roles. I think
So I have two thoughts here, and both of them, one just I had thought of earlier, and one just came to mind. The first one is, I agree with you. You and I have had conversations about how the Doctor is almost like an archaeologist. So it doesn't miss me. It is not a small tidbit to me that the person he finds the most connection with is, in fact, an archaeologist. We have River Song, who you find...
Problem with archaeologists?
Yes, but the truth is that that's exactly the person we know who ends up being later on his wife. She knows his name. That's what she whispers in his ear in the library, because she's like, I don't have time to get you to entrust me in this minute, so I'm going to say the thing that I know will get you to understand my meaning to you. So it goes without saying that it's interesting to me that as someone who is the curator of space and time, and someone who travels through and is, as you have so succinctly put it to me, a type of archaeologist, that he finds his home in someone else who does the same type of job in just a different way. So that's my first point.
Gosh,
my second point is I find it interesting that the show uses almost Christianity as a laughable, iconic, laughable, plot point. If we're thinking of like the Unicorn and the Wasp, who's the bad guy?
Yeah.
It's the vicar. Yes,
there's
the
a
one
lot
person
of...
you're supposed to... Okay, are we getting actiony here?
I thought I'd move. Yeah,
myself,
I think you're right there. There's a lot of dodgy religious characters in. There's a lot of religious specialists are not to be trusted. They're not to be. They tend to be something they're not. They tend to have agendas. They're not. So when we're talking about the religious aspects, I'm going to answer that second question first. But the religious aspects of Doctor Who are very much traditional. Monks are not to be trusted. You never trust a monk, headless or not. You don't trust any kind of religious organisation.
Never trust a vicar.
Nurse cat nuns, / whatever they are. You don't trust them. They're going to be...
Cats in Wimples.
Cats in Wimples is the best one. Yeah. There's lots of quasi-religious and actual religious denominations, and particularly Christian. There's, remember there's dodgy... In the later Capaldi episodes, there's dodgy, sort of almost quasi-Buddhist, dangerous, dodgy aliens. There's in monkish and Buddhist monkish aliens. There's lots of allusions to religious orders who are not to be fully trusted, and yet, of course, spiritual engagement with some otherworldliness is something that is considered, part of the world of Doctor Who. There are things beyond the universe. He doesn't understand Satan. Could this be Satan, or what you would understand to be Satan? Something that was fought by an ancient culture, defeated and entombed. In the same way as in the pyramids of Mars, you have a funerary Egyptian theme of Sutekh, who's been entombed by his brother Horus, and basically Ancient Alien plot line from 1978, I think it was. Basically there is an entombed alien species on Mars, and ancient Egyptian mythology is basically a preservation of that family feud, of aliens fighting, and so you have a deep-seated sense of the link between aliens and faith, which of course spills. Obviously, people who take that too literally and think that were ancient aliens and that we are all descended from some higher beings that are not to be found in our faith, but in sort of in actually the archaeological record, and are perhaps a naive and childish manifestation of this broader fascination we have with otherworldly powers and so on. I don't know. Is that an answer to your point, or
No, absolutely. And I have to ask you, through the episodes that you and I've had the opportunity to watch together, which one stands out to you as the best to represent archaeology?
Okay, well, it depends on you. This is the thing about what I mean. Can I answer the other question first, though? Because you asked me a question about
absolutely.
Because I suppose the problem is when we're talking about archaeology and archaeologists, the literary version of archaeology and archaeologists and the real versions of what archaeology and archaeologists are very different. So when we're talking about River Song being an archaeologist, and that's her role and her title, and Dr. Song, Professor Song, by the time she gets to the library, and when we're thinking about the archaeologist as a doctor, I don't mean that he's necessarily a doctor in any way that exists in our real world. He is a literary doctor. He's taking on those combating ancient mysterious forces, deciphering puzzles, uncovering ancient clues, tackling the unknown. It's very much a spiritual model of archaeology, which is found in Indiana Jones. It's found in the Exorcist films, for crying out loud. It's found in that idea there's dangerous arcane forces that could harm humanity. They can take the form of a Dalek, a weeping angel, or they can be a possessed little child on a bed. But the point is, it's all part of that "Are you my mummy?" It's all it's all those kind of different uncanny ways that. So I suppose that's the first point to say. But also, I think that he mocks archaeologists, he encounters archaeologists. Archaeologists are shown as figures of fun and almost deluded in the show. And archaeologists don't always get a good write-up within these shows. So the one Toby Zed is possessed by Satan in the Satan pit, and he's the most susceptible to he's trying to uncover and decipher this ancient script, and he's the one that is most prone to being possessed by this enemy, whatever it may be. And then you have Mr. Copper, who ends up having a happy ending. He's the ship historian with the first degree in earthmonics in the Christmas episode, episode 14 of season 3.
Yes, Titanic.
On the Titanic. He's the ship historian, and of course his knowledge, he's mocked because his historical knowledge of Earth history is nonsense, of course. And he says, where they sacrifice, I don't know, is his view of Christmas is comedic. So we have almost archaeologists represented as charlatans, as susceptible, not necessarily because of their own failings, but they are, or they're vain. Their own lust for knowledge is always the thing that means they uncover the ancient evils. The Ice Warriors, Patrick Troughton, Second Doctor, or Professor Scarman. Uncovering Sutek in the pyramids of Mars. So archaeologists are egotistical, driven, and often wrong, and yet the Doctor is a kind of archaeologist himself. So there is a power of detection, of working out the puzzles and exploring, adventuring that he sees a connection to. So I think it is. And I should also say that while it's in later series, there's a lot of museums, antiquities, collecting, theft. A lot of those things are pursued through in Doctor Who. So an episode on Planet of the Dead, is it, where he's encounters a Lady de Souza who's stealing a early medieval chalice from
that's right,
museum, which was actually filmed at the National Museum of Wales. But you get sort of this sense of the preservation of ancient cultures and objects is a theme running through. I've actually in answering your last question, I think which episode gives us most representation of archaeology and archaeologists?
In a positive,
Crying
I
out
would say
loud!
in a positive light. In a positive
Well,
light, what do you think?
I mean, it has to be River Song, but then those two episodes, these are disturbing because Ashton Durada are actually saying that the hoard of knowledge in the library is a dead forest. It's almost a plundered colonial product. And the Ashton Durada are eating conscious that are taken over a library because it's their home. So it's almost like colonially creating the act of collecting in a civilization context. So maybe that's why I'm reading it. But Ashton Durada, and when they speak to the doctor, they, let us stay in our forest. It's their forest. Interesting
Right?
theme there. And then simultaneously, here's the adventuring archaeologist Professor Scott coming in to try and work out what's happened. For me, I think the biggest thing of those pair of episodes that's really archaeological is the idea of memory. And memory in the books of culture and civilization, but memory in terms of the computer trying to save the souls of the dead from being eaten by the Vashta and saving them. That Donald Noble is saved. She's saved as her existence is being uploaded. And that's what happens to Riversong, obviously, at the end of the second episode. But then most are brought back. So there's a whole series of nested themes in that show. I haven't picked yet about archaeology and our ability to try and store, preserve past knowledge, but how that is a problematic process, I think problematic. And you cannot save everyone, you cannot save everything, you cannot literally upload entire lives through archaeology. So archaeology is not salvation. You can't dig yourself to heaven, so to speak, or to whatever afterlife you aspire to obtain. So I don't know, there's lots of moral and ontological, metaphysical levels there that I'm not very well dealing with, but I think it's really interesting.
I think with Professor Song, I think that is I think that's actually something that is a theme within Doctor Who in general, is this idea that he fights against the idea that you cannot fight everyone. And yes, unfortunately, Professor Howard, your audio is kind of cutting in and out. And
I seem to have Wi-Fi for some reason. I have no clue why. I'm going to try and
yeah. We'll pause here.
See if I can do anything about it.
I kind of see you. Oh, you're muted. Hold on. We'll give him a few minutes. Hey,
I don't know what's going on. It just says I don't have Wi-Fi, but I don't know what's going on. If I can't keep going, then just
no, you're fine. You're actually fine now.
Okay.
For me, the idea with Professor Song especially highlights the idea, like you were saying, that you cannot save everyone. And what happens is, I think that the Doctor fights against that. He has this innate need to him to believe that humanity can be saved, and it just uses Professor Song as kind of the plot for that. And I think that that's where I believe, for me, that the Doctor is not just an archaeologist, but he's clergy. For me, when I watch Doctor Who, what I see is this being who is going through all of space and time to give humanity hope, to bring humanity, not just humanity, but all of the universe, to give them this idea that they're not alone in the world. Like I said earlier, isolation for us. And even now, like, we live on planet Earth, but we dream about what's out there. Are we alone in the universe? Are we alone? And I think that part of his job is to show that we are actually not alone, and that if we are connected to each other, we have We have a lot more instinctual power than we believe in. Like, there are some themes that I've noticed are slightly, and I say this with all due respect to the BBC, please don't come at me, that are slightly anti-Semitic. When we get into the Shakespearean episode, The Witches, they are definitely an anti-Semitic trope. The use of the ugly noses and things of that nature come from a long history of anti-Semitism. You know, I don't know that the writers knew that. I think they just said, hey, we're going to use this witch theme. And so that's what they do. But I'm not as upset about it because it's not as if it's only Judaism that they poke fun at. Like I said, the vicar is the bad guy. We have cats and wimples. And coming back to New Earth, it is extraordinary to me that they use the theme of this religious order, these nuns who then think that they are above God to create what they do. You go down into the barrels of this hospital to find that they have been doing human experimentation and using people as lab rats because they believe that they are better than God. I mean, that is the takeaway for me, is their belief is we are going to beat God at God's own game, but while simultaneously being this religious order. And then when we go forward into Gridlocked, we see this one cat, this one nun who has done penance. You know, the penance of being that I've decided to become the caretaker of the face of Bo. You know, I'm going to devote my life to trying to do in what Judaism would call tshuva, to try and return to what my original purpose was, which is to be a caretaker, to be someone who is supposed to care for people. I'm going to devote my life to that with the face
Maybe
of
we
Bo.
should return to the Master as another quasi-religious figure in future episodes, because I mean the Master is, you know, we can't talk about we've talked about the Doctor as if we can talk about him without discussing the Master as a, and yet of course the Master is everything we've said applies as a flip side, you know, brothers and yet not brothers, you know, this whole, I mean, that's the whole, I think that's the,
we can't have one without the other. And if we look at it in terms of if you look at it through a religious lens, Christianity, it is almost, you cannot have God
you frozen
without having Satan.
Well, you just flipped.
Oh, you cannot have God without Satan. To me, that is. Oh yeah.
Oh, you did that.
Am I okay?
No, it's just that you broke up for a second. I thought you flipped the lens, but it was just that you'd moved.
Yeah. So, in Christian terminology, I think that if you have the Doctor who is seen as this mad god in a box, going through all to save everything, then you have to identify the Master as being the opposite, Lucifer, Satan, who his only need is to subjugate humanity, and in fact does so with the Toclafane. And by the way, Derek Jacobi should have been allowed to continue to play the Master. Don't get me wrong, but when we get back to, we come back and we see all these people who are now locked up into these little balls. The Toclafane are humans that have been subjugated under the Master. So I agree that you cannot have one without the other. There's almost like this balance to use, there's always one Sith and, two Sith and two Jedi kind of thing happening.
While we're talking about the religious and mythological, sorry. Obviously there are individual episodes that we find out that the God, for example, there's lots of religious elements, right? We find out that the Doctor and Donna end up being worshipped as family gods by a Roman family who moved to Rome, right? So we know the Doctor gets treated as a deity in multiple episodes, and we know that there are allusions. There's episodes where ancient Egyptian, ancient real world religions that are not Christian. There's a lot of Christianity, a lot of Christian symbolism. But what about Norse paganism? Because we've got the curse of Fenric in the old Doctor, in the Sylvester McCoy. I think I've identified quite a few Norse mythological themes running through the new series, but I don't know if other people have seen them or not, or whether it's all in my mind. Have you any thoughts about the Norse pagan elements of Doctor Who at all?
I would say Bad Wolf.
Yeah. So what do you
Obviously,
think that is?
Fenrir.
Yeah.
I
So
said
you think
Fenrir. Oh yeah.
so? This idea of apocalyptic chaos that is destructive but not necessarily evil, or what? I mean, what's the idea there? I mean, do they think that through properly? Did they ever properly manifest that? I don't know, because they go to Norway where there's Bad Wolf Bay, so
Wolf.
there's
That, and it's
a Scandinavian connection, but they don't really articulate it, do they? They leave it hanging there, don't they?
I
Or
think
is
they
that
do
just
that with a
me?
lot. No, I don't think that's you. I actually think the first time, so I've seen the Doctor lots and lots of times, and
Mm.
without making it seem like I am kissing your British ass. You watching it with you has probably been my most favorite go through because of the nuances that both of us kind of pick up when we're doing this. So when we came upon the whole Bad Wolf, and then we go through to Bad Wolf Bay, I'm like, oh yes, and it's in Norway, and suddenly those two things clicked for me, that this could very much be a allegory for Norse heathenry, Norse paganry, and the faith of Norse religion. But I don't know if the writers did that or if they just thought Bad Wolf would sound interesting, and so then of course they take us to Norway, which in honesty, as Professor pointed out to me, they didn't actually go to Norway. It's somewhere in Wales, but
South Wales, yeah, the beach on the Penarth, I think. Or yeah,
I think you could make a great deal of side money offering tours in Wales, so all the places that
I know all the places.
has.
Yeah, I mean I should have said another archaeology element of this is locations. Is that Castell Coch near Cardiff? Loads of castles on the Welsh borders are used throughout the new series. Abbeys, historic properties, not just in Wales, in England too. Remember, a lot of the old Doctor was filmed around around where I grew up, just between London and Reading. So many gasworks. It's like Blake Seven in the 70s. Blake Seven, it's like the joke in the League of Gentlemen. 1974, you couldn't move down here for Cybermen. It's this idea that every cave system in the north of England, or every gasworks near London, or every abandoned gravel pit in the Thames Valley was being utilised as a filming location for one or more sci-fi series. But no, seriously, in the new series, there's as well as Cardiff Bay, there's loads of historic filming locations, and also, to be fair, also some really prominent historic monuments that are drawn into integral part of the storyline. So everything from the Empire State in Manhattan to Alexandra Palace in the as the sort of home of TV in Britain. Iconic buildings, Southwark Cathedral in the episode where Mark Gatiss turns into some kind of strange mad creature that he's created because his potion goes wrong. There's all sorts of really important historic monuments. Anyway, that was a sideline and didn't answer your question, but I do feel that there is. But in terms of that, so I think they jump all over the show in terms of different historical genres and different themes. But I do like the Norse mythological aspect, and there's other comedy bits coming up that you think, well, they just threw that in there, didn't they? Like live chess, which we'll come back to in a future session, where with this comedy Odin with one eye. But there are some sort of serious ideas of constant apocalyptic themes of end of worlds that are as much Norse mythological as they are anything Christian or anything else, aren't they?
And I'd like to add on to that. I do believe, like the Satan pit, when he goes down and has to deal with, basically the Doctor Who version of the Balrog, to me, very much seems like the same as Loki being strung down and, having to wait until Ragnarok. So I think there are some intersecting themes there across. And I don't even think that the monks that we encounter in Tooth and Claw are necessarily Christian monks. They show a
No.
degree of martial artistry that could be very well Taoist, Buddhist, anything that was not inherently Christian. So I think that Doctor Who has a lot of themes running through it that have nothing to do with Christianity, but a lot to do with mysticism and the idea of spiritualism, and instead of necessarily the idea of religious texts. But I do think they like to take the mickey out of Christians.
I think that is the overriding theme, and for me, because we did put death in the title of this, it's reflecting a lot of the, I suppose for me as a mortuary archaeologist, the biggest theme that I like Doctor Who for, more than any of the representations of particular historical periods or the settings or the motifs that come from historical, future, outer space, whether it's, more important than that is the reflections on mortality. So, for me, it's the way in which the show deals with, Victorian spiritualism and in thinking about the dead coming back to life. The stiffs are getting lively again, says the Welsh undertaker, which is my best line. The stiffs are getting lively again. Army of ghosts, the dead are coming back, and people are having conversations and playing football with what they think are the dead.
Are their family, yes. Reincarnation itself, yes.
You have, and one of the biggest themes that we haven't addressed, the Silence of the Library, Forest of the Dead episodes, but I want to flag up one other one, and that's cremation. The Master's cremation at the end of season 3 is one of the most powerful and under-discussed public open-air cremation ceremonies in popular culture. So I've talked about this elsewhere, where I've talked about how we are a society since the very end of the 19th century. We as a society, I mean, well, globally, since the end of the 19th century, cremation has come indoors. Cremation has become industrialized through gas-fired furnaces and various other methods. But now, industrial or developed, to use those loaded terms, societies rarely use open-air cremation. And particularly now, the UK is a mass cremating nation. Most northern European countries cremate on a massive scale. The US and Canada are moving rapidly towards dominant cremation. And Australia, but also Southeast Asia more broadly, for urban populations, I should have said urban, medicalized, medicalization of death, people are dying in hospitals rather than at home, specialists are taking over funerary industry, it's becoming commercialized. All those elements mean that cremation is no longer on an open air pyre. And simultaneously, in the last 50, 60 years, we've seen various increases in popularity of fictional representations of burning the dead on open pyres, from Vikings, fantasy genres, Star Wars, right? Cremation is a Jedi thing in Star Wars, although we find it in the new Boba Fett series also being used by the
Sand People.
The Sand People. So yes, the Tuscans. So you have cremation is appearing in our fiction all the time, but the Master's cremation really is powerful, because what it embodies is how cremation is transformation. And I use this in my teaching, because people think, oh well, burning a body on a pyre is the ultimate end, isn't it? It's utter destruction. Well, obviously the point is, burning the body on the fire in the context of a Time Lord is just asking for it, because it looks like you've ultimately decimated and dispersed and destroyed. But what survives? A ring. Who picks up the ring? And where's the ring going to go when we find out, later on? Spoilers. But you have this idea that you have total destruction of the corporeal form for a Time Lord isn't the end, but is a way of conveying that body to a new place. And we find out that, surprise, surprise, without too much spoiler, the Master isn't destroyed by that cremation process. And I think that's really interesting. Sorry.
To add to the idea of the cremation as transformation, that occurs in a great deal of spiritualism. The idea of cremation in some tribal beliefs is to allow the release of the soul into the ether, to allow it to go back to the source. So when we think of
this idea was being promoted. This idea was at the heart of the promotion of cremation in the late 19th century by the cremation movement. The cremation was simultaneously an inheritance of the Greco-Roman Western tradition. Therefore, it was something
Mhm.
civilized, not just primitive. You know, we can learn from the Hindus and the Buddhists, but we're doing this in a Western way. Again, not my view, just saying what the rhetoric to promote it. It's scientific, clean, and space saving, and all those hygienic rhetorics that surrounded cremation, but also the Christian spiritual rhetoric to try and argue that cremation is not anti-Christian, that cremation is a pure way of transforming the soul to an afterlife destination. So it is simultaneously, it's multi-faith, but we don't know in a Doctor Who, in a fictional context, it speaks to multiple faith. It speaks to global ideas that spread about cremation as transformation, not decimation, not dissolution, not um, oblivion. Cremation facilitates the conveyance of the body or the essence of the person into a new material form. And in the Master's case, as a baddie, it's a great example, not the only one in sci-fi where this takes a dark turn, where cremation isn't releasing, it is allowing evil to endure, to use a Tolkien type of thing. You know, evil was allowed to endure. The ring wasn't destroyed, and so obviously they're playing directly on a Tolkien-esque theme there, with the ring being the way in which that force is transferred. But you know, in objects, people continue. You know, either by
With
possessing those objects, living in those objects, allowing those objects to be, and we see everyone right the way through to even she who shall not be named, J.K. Rowling, using it in Harry Potter. You know, that baddies always go, what would be a really good thing to do? Let me just put all my
where can I
essence
put
into
my
objects.
soul into?
Yeah.
Yes, and
where will
with
it be
the
safe? I tell you what I'll do. You know, it doesn't make
with
any
the
sense,
crem
but it's the way we think about this as a way of, you know,
with the cremation of the master at the end, for me, it also harkens back to the idea of Hindu cremation, of the royalty. So the Maharaj and the Maharal would be cremated in these big pyres, right? And it reminds me of the idea of seti, which I'm sure are you familiar with the idea of seti? Of course you are. But for our listeners, the idea of seti is when you were someone who ruled a nation, a Maharaj or a Raj, and you died, your first wife would join you on the funeral pyre, and there's an entire ritual that would happen. And in fact, in India to this day, I mean, it was outlawed by the Brits in the early 19th century. However, there were still sati was still being committed. The last woman who went to the funeral pyre was in 1981. And there are walls and that you can see the handprints of these women who would joyfully go to the funeral pyre, because the idea of cremation for the Hindu people was the ultimate form of royalty. So there would be an entire day devoted to the fixing of the woman, the bathed in oils. The henna would be placed upon her hands, and she would place her hand prints next to the women who joyfully went to the funeral pile before her. So when I see this, it is almost, for me, the Doctor acknowledging the importance of the Master as his equal and giving him deference as someone who also is in a place where that is warranted. I don't know that in mythology, according to Doctor Who, if this kind of funeral pyre is given to everyone, but it seems almost personal to me when I watch it.
Yes.
It seems like it's a personal thing that Doctor is doing as a way to honor. Yes, you are my enemy.
Yeah.
And yes, but we didn't
this
necessarily
idea of almost
have to be this way.
auto-cremation or uni-cremation, I don't know what to call it. It's like Jon Snow and Ygritte. It's this idea that you can actually somehow, in a fantasy world, gather all that pyre material and conduct a cremation on your own. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, it's stylized, but it's really evocative. And yes, this idea of this is my personal act. It's not really a funeral because no one else is witnessing it, and yet still the Doctor does it. So it's about, so it's not just a funeral. I should have said that. It's not just, it's a personal act to consign the dead. And we see this in ash scattering in popular fiction too, that the ash, it doesn't matter if there's nobody else there, Dad's got to go to this place, I'm the only one that sees it happen. And I think there's some really powerful ideas there. Having said that, perhaps we should leave for next time discussions of cemeteries, because Doctor Who, through the Weeping Angels and many others, love a good cemetery. They love funerary spaces, tombs, subterranean spaces, Underhenge, hint, hint. Perhaps we should come back to the architectures of death and the architectures of, vaults, tombs, cellars, places of storage of the dead or storage of forces.
Oh, yes. I would love that.
A chthonic theme, if you like, a subterranean spiritual world, which connects lots of other themes. Maybe that's something for a future, because of course, with Trenzalore, of course, the TARDIS itself becomes a tomb. So we'll come back. I think we should come back to that, if I may say so. So yes. Doctor Who plays with the cremation as dissolution. The Doctor is basically auto-cremating when he regenerates. Can I just add that point? He's basically doing he's doing a spiritual Buddhist self-immolation. He is burning from the inside with his own spiritual fire, which is a concept in at least Tibetan Buddhism. At least, if not
Tibetan Buddhism.
But forgive me, listeners, if I'm getting some things wrong. But my point is, there's that idea, but there's the flip side, the idea of the storage of the dead, the sleeping of the dead, the dead that wake up, the horror of, and of course the Cybermen, come back again and again with this idea of they multiple writers in different guises love the idea of the Cybermen as being dead forever, but somehow coming back from the dead in different forms. Well, I don't know. I thought maybe we should come back to that once we've read what we should collectively or shared. Watch some more series.
To bounce off your idea of the idea of the self-immolation in terms of the reincarnation, the regeneration of the Doctor, I would like to point out in earlier seasons we didn't have this violent change that happens when William Hartnell transforms. It's just this kind of, it isn't until we see Christopher Eccleston turn into David Tennant that it's the, arms out, head back, the violent recreation. And as somebody pointed out, and I'm going to totally agree, it was the point I wanted to bring up earlier. It's almost like evocative of the Phoenix.
Yeah, I saw people commenting on that. I'm not ignoring the chat, but yeah.
No, neither am I. But it was something I thought of earlier as well. And you see an increasingly violent regeneration as we go through. When we go from David Tennant into Matt Smith, the entire TARDIS, gets reborn with the Doctor. I think for me that is something to show the connection between the TARDIS itself and the Doctor, is that they both, when one changes, so does the other. They are intrinsically linked.
Can I just intervene here and make a point just for the listeners, if anyone. We're not saying that every writer of Doctor Who has thought this through and is trying to present as a coherent worldview, right? We're not saying that. What we're using Doctor Who as is a way of thinking about themes that are wider in our contemporary society, across different faiths, across different cultures, using it as a way in. I just want to clarify that we're not trying to say that all the writers over 50 years of Doctor Who have thought, this is a mythology, this is a world that is coherent, and this is how it's going to work. They're clearly not. That's the whole point of Doctor Who. It's a mess of contradictory and interconnected ideas, many of which don't make sense and never will make sense, because we're just trying to think with them and through them to reflect on broader issues with our society. But and it's not about what, and again, death of the author, it's not about what the screenwriter thought or what the set designers all agreed. It's about the result of how this is, like just using the example, the burning of the Master at the end of season 3 of Doctor Who, for me, I'm just saying, as a commentator, is one of the most evocative of a series of other pop culture of the last 25-30 years, of which Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, Burning Zombies and others, a host of different films and TV programs have played with this theme. I'm not saying they've thought this through as a plan. No one does. It's just it's a conversation, isn't it, in popular culture, with lots of different genres and ideas messing up. And the other qualifier we have to say is that we are talking about not only a TV program, but comic books, audio books, written books. Doctor Who has, over like over its lifespan, 60 whatever years, has entered into so many spin-off series. As we talked about Torchwood, Sarah
and
Jane,
Sarah Jane Chronicle. Sarah
Chronicle.
Jane
That's it.
Adventures, and Class was the most recent one that was a spinoff of Doctor Who. Was Class? It ran for one season and was based on the school that Susan attended with William Hartnell in the very first season. So yeah, I think the only other sci-fi that, in terms of television sci-fi, that has permeated the culture with so much in terms of both archaeology, both faith, both humanity, would be Star Trek. Which is something I'm going to get you into at some point. So there's that.
Well, I'm already into it in a way, but yeah.
I'm just saying, I think there's a lot of archaeology to be said about Star Trek.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing
which is my way of
point,
wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You're going to have to watch it with me.
But the point, thank you. But the point is that, I suppose for me, is that the Doctor. Everyone says, "Oh, the Doctor mocks and laughs, points and laughs at archaeologists." No, the Doctor doesn't actually. That's him. That's not to be taken literally. You know, the Doctor.
Oh, exactly.
Is acutely attracted to and intellectually engaged with those processes of deducing problems and clues of a complex history of the universe that he doesn't, even with his amazing brain, cannot know all of the details of. And he's constantly getting things wrong about where the TARDIS goes and which point in the timeline things happen. And of course, so I think there's lots to be thought about there in terms of how the Doctor's archaeology. He's not an archaeologist per se, but an archaeology is a part of his persona and his mode of existing. I don't know. I think that's really interesting.
I did well, and I agree with you. I know these are conversations we've had while engaging with the actual show itself. I think that for me, that I agree with you. I think that the Doctor is absolutely an archaeologist of sorts, but I also think that he is somewhat removed from humanity. And
we haven't asked. I've talked to you about this before, but I don't think we've said this in this live. One question I need for you is: do you think the Doctor is a man of faith, though? Is he actually himself a man of faith? Do we ever get a glimpse of whether he is?
So here is the thing. Here is my thought process on the Doctor. Now, I know that this happens later on, and I'm not trying to give spoilers, but this is just we do come across a creation myth of Gallifrey later on, much later in the series. We're going to find that there is some sort of religion or faith base from Gallifrey. Whether he ascribes to it or not, we don't know. But the way that I see the Doctor
about all this. Okay.
I do believe that it is not that, and part of me for saying it this way, I have no other, I don't think that Doctor is a man of faith. I believe that Doctor is faith. I think that Doctor Who himself is a representation of faith, and that it's action. That what he is the representation of that faith put into action. Faith tells us, I mean, we could say he's a religion, and you and I have had this conversation before where I've said there's much difference between someone who has religious ideals and someone who is a person of faith. And I think that what it comes down to is that he is faith in action and shows that while he is somewhat above, when he starts out, he is born of blood and war and in, he talks about this with Rose when he leaves the second Doctor, that, he committed genocide and he was born of blood and he was born of war. And does that remind you of somebody? It was me when you met me. I think that was his alluding to that he gains his humanity through his companions, and that humanity is what gives him the action of faith, to believe in himself, to believe in others, to believe that the good will lead the day. Yes, exactly. I do believe he is the personification of the way faith moves us.
Because we're obviously talking in very highbrow terms, so we have to reduce this back to a TikTok mode of thinking here, Rabbi. You can hit me for this for doing this, or scowl at me if you want. But I think we have to answer.
Okay,
the
here
key
comes the
question
scowl.
Here. I think you have to answer the key question. You have to regress this back to the intellectual, sort of infantile, moronic discussions of some of the more general. Who would win in a fight between?
Oh yes, let's do it. Okay, go ahead.
That's the level, isn't it, that we should be really doing?
Okay,
who
so
would win in a fight
then
between Darth Vader and Doctor Who?
Doctor Who.
And do you want to expound on why?
Yes, because he does not rely on just himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
So for me, Doctor Who does not rely on just himself. He understands that he is nothing if he is not with his companions. It is his companions that make him the man he is. Not to say that they are the factor, the Band-Aid, the thing that heals him, but they are the thing that drives him forward. They're the thing that makes him a part of completeness. No, so who do you think would win then between Doctor Who and Darth Vader?
Well, I think the time travel gimmick, if properly used, unlike the shite way in which the Doctor usually uses it, you could easily get the edge over almost everybody, So I think, which could also apply to almost any other combatant we put him against, really. But I mean, the next one I was going to ask, so I would say, yeah, Darth Vader. Darth Vader's, I have the high ground and a sonic screwdriver, you wanker. Sorry. I told you I'd reduce.
No, I love it. Okay.
But the other one, of course, is Doctor Who versus Sauron.
Okay, so
it's more difficult because Sauron works all his power through his minions in his third age.
This is it. So this one's a difficult one, especially because, and forgive me, the listeners here are going to, I think I'm going to fall in their esteem. But until I watched Rings of Power with Professor Williams here, I was under the misapprehension that Sauron was just a giant eye. Thank you, Peter Jackson, and please forgive me. Yeah. So between Sauron and the Doctor, they do kind of both. The problem is that I am one of relentless optimism. I am both a hopeful optimist and a hopeful romantic, and I believe the good will always win the day. And so it's hard for me to see. I think it would come down to where it almost seems like Sauron would win. And then the Doctor would come up with something.
I hadn't really thought this through, but you see, both the Doctor and Sauron are meddlers, deceivers, artisans. And actually, there's a lot of similarities.
Trickster gods, if you will.
Take away the time travel element, which of course isn't, there's a lot of similarities, between. I don't know. I haven't thought this through. I'll leave that
Well, I'm just going to say this. Listen, at some point, you're going to have to think this through, and then I'm going to need the answer. Whether our listeners get the answer or not, I'm going to need it. We're going to have a conversation about this one. So I did see... Oh, after you?
No, I was going to ask you a third one, but we don't need to.
No, please. No, I like this. Are you kidding? Please, third one. Let's do it.
So in terms of fight, who would win between, I don't know, the greatest archaeologist of the Star Trek universe is Jean-Luc Picard?
Oh, no.
Or River Song?
No.
Who's the greatest archaeologist of the two?
Jean-Luc Picard, I would not consider the greatest archaeology even of Star Trek.
Oh, right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Who is hands down.
Who's that, sorry?
I said River Song would win hands down because Jean-Luc Picard,
in my opinion, what? Who's a better archaeologist? Is our DS9 dude. Oh my God! Because he sets up the whole. He gets them whole finding the whole. Sorry, my brain has gone completely. Not Cardassian. The opposite of Cardassians. The people there, the Deep Space Nine outside.
Bajoran.
Bajoran. He finds a whole Bajoran temple, doesn't he? So he's really. Cisco's the greatest accidental archaeologist. Who'd
So
win between Cisco and River Song? I don't know. Does it matter? I mean, it's just silly thing to say, isn't it? Really?
no, I love this. So for me, I think it's going to be River Song, and not just because I have a secret adoration for the fact that River Song is who she is. So for those of you who don't know, I have 3 archaeologists who are in my I have make lists, and so I have 3 archaeologists that are in my top 3, and of course it's Indiana Jones, it's River Song, and it's Professor Williams. Depending on the day, is depending on who's on the top of that list.
How much I've said dumbass things on TikTok? You mean?
You're still tied for first, so there's at least that. But I think that her passionate way in which she engages with everything is what makes her. Cisco is a wonderful, but as you said, accidental, and he has this more stalwart. Stoic.
He's an experimental archaeologist. Remember, he's the one that creates the Bajoran ship to try and get to Cardassia before Lightspeed, doesn't he? With that warp drive.
Exactly. Okay. Well, then I have a question for you, and it is from the comments. Who is the better archaeologist, Daniel Jackson from Stargate, or River Song?
I've only ever seen the film of Stargate, and I haven't bothered with the series.
Same here.
So I don't know. I think it depends how much you credit River Song with some of the things we don't know about. I have to go with River Song, don't I? Because she's not an archaeologist, but she's a thief. She's an adventuress again. She's another adventuring figure. Whereas Daniel Jackson, I don't remember that the film as he blunders into things with stupid glasses, very much like me, really. So he's too much like me. Yeah, so I have to go with River Song. She's like, I prefer to be in my mind. I prefer to be a River Song. I've got my curly hair, but that's all I've got, really.
Listen, I would like to say there is nothing about you that is stupid with your glasses. Your glasses are quite fetching. But
I haven't got them here anyway. Yeah, but thank you.
For me, I liked Daniel. I remember the movie. I did not watch the series as well, but for me, it's going to be River Song. And then I have to ask you. We have a couple of questions in the comment section. I was hoping that maybe you and I could kind of go at them a little bit.
Okay.
And
I haven't been paying attention. Should we go? I'll skip back to the beginning and see if I can find. Or have you already got?
Have you met me? I'm on top of this. So, out of the series that you and I have so far watched together, what is your most favorite episode and why? I'll let you go first, and then I'll say mine.
I'm gonna have to have a think. Actually, so I want to have a look through. I'm gonna just give me a second to have a look actually through and have a mull.
Absolutely. While you mull,
Season 1 is good but annoying. Season 2 is pretty good. There's some great individual episodes about. But again, Series 3. I don't know. There's some of the best episodes in Season 3. Human Nature. I like Human Nature as an episode, and Blink. Of Season 3 best, and I'll come back to a why. And I think of Season 4 it's going to be Silence in the Library and Forest Dead, because the mortuary themes, but since I've already identified those, I want to pick another one to sort of to take us into a different direction, something we haven't, and why I think it's my favourite. I would go with Planet of the Ood as my favourite episode of the first 4 series, because I think it deals with the issue of slavery and the issue of what in a interplanetary, intergalactic world, species that are treated as slaves and are misunderstood from the very beginning about their very identity and their very sociality and their spirituality, because the Ood are spiritual. And I think that, so I would say Planet of the Ood, because while it deals with all those issues about what is being human, what is it to live, to die, and they obviously foresee the Dr. Donna. They have a foresight as well as a connection to a hive brain that is a kind of spiritual connection through music. So I think there's lots of themes in that episode we haven't discussed that I wanted just to sort of round off and end with.
Okay. If I'm thinking to answer the same question, obviously, Silence in the Library and Forces of Death are my favorite arc, but not for its archaeological, but more for the way that the Doctor is so startled by the presence of River Song. He is always collected and always on top of things, and then he's presented with this person whom he's never met, and she knows so much about him, and it just kind of throws him off balance, and he has to deal with what that means for him in his own future. He even has her diary and says, I could look you up, Donna. I could look, and has to stop himself from his own spoilers. And that, to me, talks about how much he is affected by other people's presence. So for me, that is the arc, that the double arc that I like. But if I were picking out just one episode that I could possibly watch over and over and over again, that would be The Doctor Dances with Jack Harkness. Because I think the introduction of Jack into the world also is an upset. Here is the Doctor used to being the time traveler, and here is this con man who is this like time traveler, but he does it like in this fast, dirty like way. And in fact, that's how they kind of talk about it. What you do is dirty time travel. You're not really a time traveler. You've lowered the idea of time travel because you have a vortex manipulator. So and even then, I think that we also kind of get a glimpse into the idea that Jack's presence also throws him off kilter, because let's be honest, Jack would in fact strip anything that would allow him to, and I think that's also kind of the funny part of it.
They're not my favourite time travellers, though. You know who my favourite time travellers are, don't you?
Oh, tell.
Daleks. I just want to sit there, try and destroy the world, and when it all goes completely wrong, I just go, emergency temporal shift. And just it's like a Tory prime minister mode. When everything goes completely ballsed up, they just go, resign. Someone else can take over the mess.
Yes, I was just going to say, I am not leaving. Oh, isn't that what she did? I'm not going to leave, and then suddenly she was like, I'm resigning. Yes, that's exactly what happened.
There's a lot of Liz Truss in the Daleks, or the Daleks in Liz Truss, I think, or also Theresa May and Boris Johnson. Just go on long holidays and.
Here is the next question. I'll let you, of course, go first. Who is, from the first series, from Christopher Eccleston to Journey's End, your favorite companion, and why?
Okay. Who do we count here? Because we've got Martha, Donna, and we've got Rose. But of course, we also have Mickey. Sarah Jane in an episode.
And there's Mickey, and then there's also Jackie, and there's Jack. So we do have, and River Song, I would say, is companion even 4. So good luck, Professor.
Okay, I'm gonna trump all of those, and I'm gonna go with K9, because K9 is so annoying, so inept, so ridiculous.
Affirmative.
He is just so bad dog. Affirmative. He is. I have to say K9, if that counts.
Okay.
If not, Sarah Jane. If that doesn't count, then River Song, and if those don't count, Martha.
Okay, so who's your least favorite companion, and then I'll give you mine.
It used to be Donna, but now it's Rose. Because I don't think, in terms of the, I don't think I could. it's the acting and the dialogue that, while she's a pivotal role in the first series and her comebacks, I don't think there's a chemistry there in between the actors and in the narration that I think I can't imagine she's such an iconic and important figure for the Doctor. Whereas actually, though I didn't like her at first, rewatching it, I thought Donna, the dynamic and the, not intimacy, but the connection between Donna and the Doctor is clearer. Martha is more simple and more of a crush thing, and it dissipates, but it's more effective. But I think the whole arc of Rose doesn't work for me. It doesn't connect to me in the way that I think they wanted it to, and a lot of fans seem to like it. So I think she is the least effective for me. But sorry, that may be, but I like.
No.
I think the real the Sarah Jane David Tennant, the David Tennant Doctor, his inability to connect and explain why he left her was really horrible and powerful, in a good
Sarah
way.
Jane, talk about her all the time. Yeah.
And foreshadowed River Song. I thought it foreshadows the River Song. Like, who are you? I thought that whether that was intentional or not, I thought that worked very well in terms of his relationship with females.
If we are just discussing from Christopher Eccleston to Journey's End, I cannot use River Song. When we get into the later seasons, River Song does become the one for me. But when we're talking about from there to there, Martha was my least favorite. And it is because it's almost like she is set up to be this character who pines for the Doctor. She's set up to be heartbroken from episode 1, from her very first time with the Doctor. She is kind of set up to be the person who's going to be harmed. So she's my least favorite. Out of the rest of them, my favorite is I'm going to agree with you. It's Sarah Jane. And I think the reason it's Sarah Jane is because she has this connection with him that he has kept in there. And I think that if it's almost, to quote Jane Austen, if he loved her less, he could have talked about it more.
Yeah.
And so I think when Sarah Jane comes into contact with Rose, of course we have Mickey, look, it's the ex and the new wife. And they're kind of going back and forth. And of course you have the Doctor. Oh yeah, Sarah Jane, I talk about her all the time. But the truth of the matter is I think that she had this special place in him. And, that happens with humans all the time. You meet somebody that has become so special that you become protective. And it's almost like, I want to keep that for myself and I don't want to share that with anyone else. And I think that's kind of what Sarah Jane is. Mickey is right up there with he's worse than the Tin Dog. And I love K9. Affirmative. And I love K9.
Can I add to that evaluation by saying is it the first episode, isn't it, with the marine conglomeration or whatever it's called, the plastic, the plastic thing,
Oh, yes.
The fact that Rose doesn't even notice that Mickey's been taken over by a plastic,
yes,
says
the
very
first.
Oh, the Nestine consciousness. That's it.
Yes,
in fact, she doesn't even notice. Like, if you really cared about someone, you might notice they've been turned into an alien life force. I'd like to think. And it's never happened to me, so maybe it has happened to me, and I don't know, and therefore I'm, maybe that's the whole point. But if I looked on this, like going,
oh, I would notice.
Yeah,
I would notice.
Well, that's just my normal.
What I think that with Rose, when the story continues with Rose, and even after her left, and I would say this a lot when I watched it the first time, I was like, this entire story and part of my Hebrew seems to revolve around Rose Tyler's ass. It's just like, and I agree with you, the chemistry was not what I love. Donna's chemistry with him is beautiful, and part of what makes it beautiful is they have a deep connection. And every time somebody's like, oh, well, you're Mr. and Mrs. And they're like, no, it's like, this is trying to prove that this man and this woman could, in fact, have a deep religious or a deep spiritual connection, a deep friendship, unabiding like connection that has nothing to do with whether or not they're romantically involved. And it's the first time I think we really get to see that in that context, because everybody's in love with the Doctor. Jack is, Rose is, Sarah Jane is, going down the line. Let's not pretend like Amy Pond isn't, Clara Oswald isn't. All of them in some way are in love with the Doctor, except for Donna, who is just like, stop it, time boy. Like, she just has this way, and I think that's kind of what it is. Now, I want to answer one question so I keep getting asked over and over. Yes, I made them. You cannot buy one of these because I am the knitter of both this one and Professor Williams. So I've been asked a few times in the comments where they can get this particular scarf. You cannot. It is exactly 16 foot long. And yes, I knit them. As a
shall I do a modeling of it? Shall I do a proper modeling of it? I don't know how to model.
Well, let's do it. I'll do the same thing. Hold on. Let me just get here, and I don't know if you can actually, if I can back up enough, but let's see. Yeah. Yeah, so if you, and really it came down to Professor Willems telling me how much he loved Tom Baker, and he was also my favorite. So I was like, I have this great idea. You have a birthday coming up, and I have the ability to craft. So this is what's going to happen. So yes, although I could be persuaded to knit another one, but it would have to be for someone awful special. Are there any other, how are you feeling about this session, Professor? Do you have any other things we'd like to hit?
I've been thinking about Doctor Who for so long, and yet I still feel I'm far from being an expert, and there's so many things we can cover. There are things I'd like to come back to. For example, I want to talk more about mechanoids and cyborgs. I had loads more I want to talk about humanoids and hybrids, and that's a theme that's different, that really isn't covered by Boyd's paper of 20 years ago. The different kinds of artifacts and material cultures of power and significance, and we've covered a lot of that, but the dead we've covered. But the one theme I wanted to talk about was the contemporary, but that's not really about spiritual, but I think a lot of the power of Doctor Who is about jumping to the future and the past, but we have to remember how many scenes of Doctor Who, how many settings of Doctor Who were intended to be contemporary and already artifacts of history in their own right. So I was watching and observing in one episode milk floats, and we don't see milk floats anymore, or I don't. I haven't seen a milk float in over 15 years. And there's other things about British society and British landscape that are now deep relics. So the Doctor's police box was intended to be a contemporary, quirky, mundane, quotidian. It's supposed to be a quotidian, I think originally a quotidian reference to a type of time device that fails to work properly and cannot disguise itself, so it appears as a police box, a 1950s police box. And of course it's become an artifact, it's become an antique, it's become a curio. But there are also many things, even in the series we watched from the early noughties. When were these first filmed? Season 1 was what, 2000 and I've lost track. 2002, 3?
2005, I think.
Sorry, I've lost track, to be honest with you. But my point is, there's already lots of the scenes of underpasses and phone usage that are already historical. These are artifacts already, even when they're trying to show the contemporary. The references to Tumblr or to Facebook or to society, to Michael Jackson, to music, that's supposed to be contemporary. Whether it's right or wrong, Rose does refer to Lady Cassandra as Michael Jackson, which is obviously a reference to cosmetic surgery, but could also be seen in, even at the time, could have been seen as perhaps a rather cruel and unfair, reference to someone obsessed with skin, and that's not perhaps, but my point is, it is a historical. The show is a historical record in itself of our times, our changing values and attitudes, and its landscapes because of where it's set and how it's filmed. So I think there's a lot. That's a point. It's not really about death. It's not really about religion, but I think it's worth mentioning as well.
I do too, and you made me think of something. I thought of something that I meant to say earlier, and I completely got off track. honestly, one of the more moving episodes for me is Madame de Pompadour. Because the girl in the fireplace, and I think it kind of goes into talking about, for me, it is allegory for the way some of these companions are ever changed and almost wait for the doctor. When Wilf talks about how every night he will look up into the stars on Donna's behalf. I believe ultimately that is sort of what Madame de Pompadour did too. She, no matter how, she dies when she's 43, but if we really think about it, she's always that girl who's been waiting in the fireplace for her doctor to return.
And that's not the only one, because we get a certain Amy Pond doing the same, don't we? And
the girl who waited, yes.
Who waited,
I think that I love that one. Plus, she makes him. You said milk float, and it made me think of him talking about how he thinks he invented the banana daiquiri because he went to this ball with her, and so it kind of triggered it for me. Cassandra was also problematic. Oh, I agree with you. Cassandra was a very problematic character, and goes into the lengths we will take to. I mean, she talks about how she's the only pure human left when we're on the end of the world.
Yes,
she's the only pure human. Yes, that is a very good indication about the way that they write about racial purity. I don't know if anyone do you have any closing wisdom for us?
No, other than
Professor?
While it seemed quite a loose discussion, I do feel that we're on journeys of discussing this from our own expertise, and we're not trying to speak with any definitive, but equally we've thought long and hard about this. That's my. So I hope we haven't said anything that's too stupid, but equally we are trying to think through issues that I don't think I've heard talked about, but maybe that's, if anyone knows of any other sources or academic writings or blogs that we should perhaps consult that have addressed some of these themes already, that'd be very useful to me. So
Absolutely.
I'm always open to anybody who can share any further information on this topic, because as I said, people have a more intimate, detailed knowledge of the Doctor Who universe than they do of, or care more about it than they do about many other things. So,
but I think it's a jumping off point to get them to care about many other things, and I think that's partly why people are attracted to it. I will say that in my own research on my own time about the way that Dr. Hughes has permeated pop culture and kind of used the spiritual landscape as one of its hallmarks, I have not seen anything written on the religion and faith that is so obviously portrayed within there. So that is something that I am considering probably dipping my feet into, about the religion of Doctor Who. I've seen one book written on it, Relative Faith in Time and Space, but it was really a primer for Sunday school teachings for Christianity. So I think delving into that might be something I might look into in the future. As always, if you have questions, like if there's any other questions here, we're happy to answer them. I would like to invite you to do this again with me. Obviously, I'm always willing to discuss, and that means we'll have to continue watching. Oh no. And you will be able to find this up on Professor Williams' YouTube probably in a day or two. I will be sending it over to him. If you didn't know, I did start. I cannot believe I did this. I started a YouTube just in case I wanted to upload things like this.
Fantastic! Well, you have first dibs of this. It's your thing.
No. This one's all you. I had already and but yes, I would love to do this again. We'll have to start at the next Doctor with David Morrissey, which is one of my favorite of the David Tennant specials, and come back to it. I have enjoyed my time with you as always, and if truth be told, if I had to choose between you and River Song, you win.
Oh, that's thank you so much. Thank you so much. You can share us. Put it that way.
I mean, okay. Thank you again. I appreciate. I want to shout out to Spiritual Squirrel Box, who offered her time to come and moderate. She is an excellent moderator. I love you so much. I appreciate you so much for coming in. I appreciate everyone who had thoughtful comments. And if you are mutual of mine, please go ahead and message me if you have any things you'd like to see us talk about in relation to Doctor Who in the future. Obviously, also message Professor Williams. You can always Q&A us. And if you'd like to see some answers in the future, let us know, and we'll be happy to do it. Once again, thank you for being our companions as we travel through time and space with the Doctor.
Don't blink.
Don't even blink.
Sadly, we're all going to die. But while you're waiting, why not follow Archaeodeath? Subscribe now on YouTube.